Let's go team by team. And I want you to give me a verdict of where each team stands. And I'm going to leave out the sort of surefire playoff teams. But I want to start with the team that you watch most closely. And it's the team that I
Pretender.
can figure out the least in the Boston Bruins.
They're pretenders, man. Like it's not even close to me. The success that they've had over the past like month or since Christmas, it's been carried by two players. Jeremy Swayman turned it around and been like a really, really elite goaltender since Christmas, with the exception of the last start that he had. Him and David Pastrnak, the only two guys that are really, really carrying them on a nightly basis. And I don't think that they do anything particularly well outside of that. We've seen it. I don't think that they're necessarily as bad as they were to start the season under Jim Montgomery, but they've been very average under Joe Sacco for the most part as well. So I don't see them being any sort of real contender, even if they get in that wild card spot.
I'm impressed. Every time someone says Joe Sacco, I'm like, you mean Joe Sakic? I can't help myself. Joe Sacco? Sakic? All right, sorry.
We've had a lot of practice with that. So
yeah. But all right, let me play devil's advocate. Okay.
Yeah.
So the two things holding them back previously, poor goaltending, and David Pastrnak was just very average to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a recipe for them to get in?
It could be a recipe for them to get in. I'm not gonna say that they're not gonna get in. And if they get in, it might be a product of the Eastern Conference like wild card just being
Flop.
Basically the mushy middle, as one Jeff Merrick would say. Yeah, like I'm not gonna say they're not gonna get in. And maybe if they get a preferable first round matchup against the Toronto Maple Leafs, anything can happen. But they're not a team worth taking seriously in my mind.
What would they need to do at this deadline in order for you to change that opinion?
I think they'd need at least one top six forward, preferably two. A center would be great, help bump down the depth a little bit. And Elias Lindholm hasn't been the top line center that they hope that they were getting in free agency, but they're just not generating enough, and they don't have enough play drivers. Like David Pastrnak is their primary play driver, and what they hope that they were getting from Elias Lindholm, like he's not a play driver. I think he's a good player, but they just don't have enough guys to facilitate offense. They're pretty much one and done a lot in the offensive zone. They don't get a lot of retrievals. They don't get a lot of driving. Their details aren't very good. And obviously with their back end being banged up over the last month and change, like I'm not going to judge what they've been defensively without McAvoy and Lindholm, but their coverage hasn't been good enough either. So they got a lot of problems, and I don't think that it's going to be an easy fix at the deadline. And the bigger question is, do you want Don Sweeney and Cam Neely being the guys to try to address those fixes at the deadline, given what they've done and how this roster has been constructed in the first place?
So is what you're really advocating for some change at the top?
I think that if things really bottom out and this team is exposed, I would certainly consider it.
Now, let me flip it again. And if let's just say they were to go out and get JT Miller, how would you feel about that? Play driver, can play center,
Yeah,
adds intensity.
makes a lot of sense. He does make a lot of sense, but again, like it's the I don't think JT Miller puts you over the top if you're the Bruins this year. And then the bigger question is, what does JT Miller become for you given the window that you're in if you're the Bruins, and is the cost worth it? And like, who is JT Miller going to be in a few years when you're paying him several $1 million? I think the wear and tear on JT Miller could be a little evident a year or two down the road.
Okay. So then that brings us to the $36 billion question of what do you do with Brad Marchand?
I I I would have a hard time trading him just based off of what he means to your team. And I don't see them trading him based off of like where they'll probably be. Like, I don't think they're going to punt on this season, especially with the seats warming up a little bit for the front office. Like Don Sweeney and Cam Neely could feel the pressure of the Jacobs, knowing that like their jobs could be a little shaky. And if that's the case, I certainly don't see them trading Brad Marchand on an expiring deal for whatever the return may be, because I don't think it's going to be a big return. I just don't see them punting that way and kind of burning the fan base and giving us a tough pill to swallow.
I think the Bruins are in a spot where they've You don't know what could happen in the East this year.
Yeah, that's why I would kind of just sit still and wait to see what happens.
I'm
Soft
thinking
sell,
the
maybe.
East is as wide open as I can remember it. Outside of Carolina, I mean, who really scares you now?
I mean, Florida always is going to scare me just based off of who they turn into once the playoffs begin. But otherwise, I would largely agree with that assessment.
Does Washington scare you?
I think Washington is a very good, legitimate team. They don't necessarily scare me as much as Carolina and Florida would in terms of a playoff run, just based off of that kind of experience and knowing what's ahead for them.
Yeah, I don't know how you could watch New Jersey over the last 6 weeks or the Maple Leafs with what's happened to them in the playoffs and say that anyone particularly scares you.
No, I
Like,
mean, I think it's Washington. It's Carolina and it's Florida, and then maybe Washington, and then the rest is open season.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.